Thank you for tuning into Tanaka TV. This is the best and future biggest fight channel on YouTube. And today we're going to talk about Paulo Costa coming out. And there's information about Paulo Costa being the most tested UFC fighter on the roster. And I have to say that I get it. I get it from the UFC's standpoint, right? If we look at the history of what the UFC has been through when it comes to PED, performance enhancing drug problems, we have to look at that closely, right? Because there have been a lot of problems, and I think that these problems exist in all sports, but we're talking about the UFC right now. And what was that case that just happened not too long ago with Mark Hunt? Did I believe Mark Hunt won his case with the UFC when it came to him fighting, I think specifically said being Brock Lesnar and other UFC fighters who were on PEDs, and the UFC allowed it. They allowed the fight to push through. And so I think that it's a good idea for the UFC to test fighters. But why? Why does the UFC test Paulo Costa more than other fighters? I'm going to put it this way, people. If I looked like Paulo Costa, I would test myself to make sure that I wasn't on PEDs. Paulo Costa is chiseled. He's got that build that makes it look like he might be on PEDs. Not to mention that he is an elite fighter. I'm not taking anything away from Paulo Costa as far as his performances in the UFC. I think Paulo Costa is a phenomenal fighter. He's explosive. Like I said, he has the frame, he has the build, and in the past, people with that sort of setup were on PEDs. And so we have to look at what the UFC is looking at. And do I think, if I was Paulo Costa, would I feel offended? Of course. Of course I would feel offended. Because, hey, why aren't you testing other fighters like this? Why aren't you testing other fighters like Izzy like this, or Sean Strickland like this? You have to understand, Paulo Costa, that you look like you are on PEDs, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry, and I don't want people to think that I think that this is a fair assessment of Paulo Costa and him getting tested more than other fighters. But life isn't fair. The UFC won't be fair when it comes to this, because they are making sure that their performances when it comes to being fair with fights is in hand. And what, didn't USADA just leave the UFC, which I think is huge news. I think it wasn't spoken of enough that USADA is no longer a part of the UFC. USADA was a very hardcore, strict organization when it comes to testing. And I don't know what the UFC is using now. They might be using something that's more in-house, but that's besides the point. That's besides the point. And so all I'm saying is that I understand both sides of the party. I understand that Paulo Costa feels some type of way when it comes to being tested, probably far more than other fighters. But I also understand the UFC for testing him because he looks like a Greek god. I'm just going to put it that way. I understand both parties. And so comment down below what you guys think about the UFC testing Paulo Costa more. All I'm saying is I just think the UFC is trying to cover their tracks. They did just lose a case to Mark Hunt. What would you do if you were the UFC? But on the flip side, how would you feel if you were Paulo Costa? If I was the owner of UFC, if I was on the side of UFC, I would definitely test Paulo Costa. Would I test him more? Probably. Naturally, right? Like, naturally, I would test Paulo Costa more just based off of, like I said, his physique. And I understand that there are a lot of performance-enhancing drugs that are not physique-based, that are not strength-based. I mean, if you look at TJ Dillashaw, who took performance-enhancing drugs, he didn't, he didn't look like a titan. He didn't look like somebody who was necessarily taking performance-enhancing drugs. However, his performance benefited from it. He was taking PEDs that were benefiting him in the route of being more endurance based. He could take a shot a little bit better. He could fight through fights a little bit longer and more steady. And I would say that caused Garbrandt the fight in a lot of ways. And maybe Garbrandt would have lost, sure. However, when you look at that performance by TJ Dillashaw, and then knowing that TJ Dillashaw was on performance-enhancing drugs, it is hard to look at that fight and think, hey, if he wasn't on PEDs, would Cody Garbrandt have been a champion longer? It's something that I think about, and I think it's something that you guys should think about. When it comes across to a sport like a combat sport, you really have to be careful with these kinds of things. And like I said, maybe on Paulo Costa's part that he shouldn't feel like he should be tested as much. If I was Paulo Costa, I wouldn't feel like I should be tested as much just because of my physique. Just because that I have more muscles. I get it. I understand. However, from the UFC's standpoint, I also understand. And so comment down below, which side do you kind of lean on? Do you feel like you're on more of the UFC side or more on Paulo Costa's side? I think that there should be testing across the board, no matter who you are, no matter what your physique looks like, no matter what your weight class is. It is kind of crazy that they test Paulo Costa more. I'm interested in seeing, did they test Francis Ngannou more? Did they test, who I think has a phenomenal physique, Tyron Woodley more when he was in? What is the reasoning for the UFC testing Paulo Costa more? And I'm here to tell you that I know what it is, and I've just been telling you what it is. It is because of what he looks like on top of how he performs. And that's all I have for you guys today. Comment down below again what you guys think about this. Do you think that it's right that the UFC drug tests him more? I don't think it's right, but I also don't think it's wrong. I'm sorry that I can't give you a straight up answer, but that's just how it is. I just think of it depends on your perspective. Are you on Paulo Costa's side? Are you on the UFC side? Or are you on my side where it comes to you see both sides of the coin? And so you've just tuned in, like I said, to the best and biggest fight channel. Future biggest. Will be the biggest at some point. Future biggest UFC channel on YouTube. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace. Bye.